The Greek army has been betrayed. While Leonidas and his 300 Spartans hold the line at Thermopylae, the massive Persian army is already preparing to finish its campaign. 20,000 warriors are moving around the Greek positions through a secret mountain path. The Spartans understand. There is no way out. They remain in their position to give the rest of the Greek forces a chance to escape. King Leonidas knows how this battle will end. He will die here. Later, his body will be found by the Persians, and Xerxes will order him to be beheaded and his head placed on a stake. For Persia, this was supposed to become a symbol of victory. But history would remember everything differently. Because a small group of Greeks did something no one expected. They forced the greatest empire of their time to pay an enormous price for every step forward. At the beginning of this campaign, Persia was the largest power in the world. The empire stretched from Egypt to India. In the hands of Xerxes were enormous resources, wealth, and an army that many considered almost impossible to defeat. The Persian king was gathering an army unlike anything the world had ever seen. According to ancient sources, hundreds of thousands of soldiers and thousands of ships took part in the invasion. Modern historians debate the exact size of the army, but one thing remains clear. The scale of the invasion was enormous. To move his forces across the Hellespont, the Persians built massive pontoon bridges, and so that the fleet could safely pass near the peninsula of Mount Athos, Xerxes ordered the construction of a huge canal. This was not just a military campaign, it was a demonstration of power. Persia wanted to show the entire world that no one could stop its movement toward the west. Most Greek cities understood the difference in strength. Many city-states chose not to take the risk and accepted Xerxes' authority even before the battles began. But some decided to resist. Around 30 Greek cities united against the invaders. Among them was Sparta, a state that had built its entire way of life around war for centuries. The Spartans were not raised like ordinary citizens. From the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and sent to undergo harsh training. They were taught to endure hunger, pain, and hardship. They had to learn how to survive under any conditions. Young Spartans trained to fight, hunt for food, and withstand suffering. Their greatest value was simple: being ready to die for their state. For a Spartan, death in battle was not considered defeat. The true shame was returning alive after fleeing. King Leonidas was exactly this kind of person. According to legend, an oracle gave Sparta a terrible choice. Either Sparta would fall, or one of its kings would die. Leonidas understood that the prophecy was about him. He was around 60 years old. He knew what awaited him. Not victory, but his final battle. Thermopylae became one of the most famous battles of the ancient world. The reason was simple. The location was perfect for a small army. The narrow passage between the mountains and the sea prevented the Persians from using their greatest advantage, their overwhelming numbers. Because, on an open battlefield, hundreds of thousands of warriors could surround their enemy. But at Thermopylae, they were forced to move through a narrow corridor. When the Persians saw the small Greek force, they first tried to avoid a direct battle. A messenger was sent to King Leonidas with an offer to surrender. Xerxes believed that the Greeks would understand the impossible situation they were facing. The Persian army was enormous. The Greek force was small. The outcome seemed obvious. But Leonidas refused. The Spartans had already accepted their fate. They were not there because they believed they could survive. They were there because someone had to stand. The first Persian attacks began. The Medes, one of the forces serving within the Persian Empire, moved forward. But they quickly discovered a problem. The Greek phalanx was created specifically for battles like this, a wall of shields, long spears, every warrior protecting the man beside him. The Persians could not get close enough. Before they could strike, they were already facing the spears of the Greek hoplites. Wave after wave crashed into the Greek formation, and wave after wave was pushed back. The Spartans were not simply defending, they were controlling the battle. They used false retreats, making the Persians believe the Greek line was breaking. When the enemy rushed forward and lost formation, the Greeks turned around and attacked. Tired soldiers moved back, fresh warriors replaced them. The phalanx continued moving like a single machine. By the end of the first day, something impossible had happened. A small group of Greeks had stopped an army that was supposed to destroy them without difficulty. Xerxes watched the battle from a distance. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the Persian king repeatedly stood up in disbelief at what he was seeing. His massive army could not move forward. And then Xerxes made his next move. He sent his best warriors into battle, the Immortals, the elite force of the Persian Empire. Their number was always kept the same. If one soldier died, another immediately replaced him. That was why the Greeks called them the Immortals. They were the finest soldiers Persia had. They had the best equipment, the best armor, and the highest status. When they entered Thermopylae, Xerxes expected them to break the Greek resistance. But the opposite happened. The Immortals faced the same problem. The narrow battlefield took away their greatest advantage. They had more soldiers, but they did not have enough space to use their numbers. Their arrows flew toward the Greek positions. Some found their targets. But once the battle became close combat, everything changed again. Greek spears were longer. Their shields and armor were better suited for this kind of fighting. The Persian elite warriors began falling one after another. The entire day, Xerxes' best soldiers tried to break through, and the entire day, they failed. For the Persian Empire, this was not only a military problem, it was a blow to its reputation. For the first time, many people saw that Persia could be stopped. Even the legendary Immortals could die. Xerxes was furious, but he did not yet know that the solution to his problem would come soon. The man's name was Ephialtes. Ephialtes was Greek, a man who knew the land better than almost any Persian commander. He understood that there was an ancient mountain path passing through the cliffs above Thermopylae, a road that allowed anyone who used it to bypass the Greek positions and appear directly behind them. And he decided to use this knowledge. For a great reward, Ephialtes went to Xerxes' camp and revealed the secret path. For the Persian king, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. There was no longer any need to break through the Greek defenses by force. Now they could simply go around them. Xerxes immediately sent a force. Around 20,000 soldiers began moving through the mountains during the night. They marched quietly, trying not to attract attention. But when morning came, it became clear. The plan had worked. The Persians were already approaching the Greek rear. Leonidas received the news. Now he understood. Thermopylae could no longer be held. The battle was lost. But one question remained. What should they do next? If the entire Greek force stayed and was surrounded, they would all be destroyed. Then Persia would have a clear path to conquer all of Greece. Leonidas made his decision. He ordered the allied forces to retreat. They had to escape and continue the fight in the future. But Leonidas stayed. Along with him remained his 300 Spartans. They knew there was no way back. For a Spartan, retreat was worse than death. Their entire lives had prepared them for this exact moment. The moment when they had to choose between fear and duty. But the Spartans were not the only ones who remained. 700 warriors from the city of Thespia also decided to stay voluntarily. They understood that this day would be their last. No one who stayed expected victory anymore. They knew the enemy was simply too powerful, but their mission had changed. They were not there to win. They were there to delay Persia, to give the rest of Greece time to prepare. On the morning of the third day, Leonidas spoke to his warriors. According to legend, he told them, "Eat breakfast well, because tonight we will dine in Hades." These words became one of the most famous symbols of courage in history. They represented the entire philosophy of Sparta. They were not searching for a glorious death. They were simply fulfilling their duty. When the final Persian attack began, the Greeks moved forward to meet the enormous army. They were no longer defending the narrow passage. They knew the end was near. But every warrior wanted to take as many enemies with him as possible. The battle became brutal. Spears broke, swords became covered in blood. The ground was filled with the bodies of fallen soldiers. The Spartans continued fighting even after losing their main weapons. They switched to shorter swords, and when even those were gone, they continued resisting with anything they could use. At that moment, Leonidas fell. The king of Sparta died among his warriors. But his death did not stop the Greeks. Instead, it pushed them to fight even harder. For the Spartans, the body of their king had great importance. Again and again, they charged forward, trying to prevent the Persians from taking Leonidas's remains. According to tradition, they managed to recover his body several times, but against the endless numbers of Persia, they could not fight forever. More and more Persian soldiers surrounded the remaining defenders. Eventually, the Persians decided not to continue the close battle. They stepped back, and they began firing. Thousands of arrows filled the sky. The last defenders of Thermopylae fell, but their defeat became a victory of another kind. They showed the world that the greatest empire of the age was not invincible. After the battle, Xerxes personally came to see the battlefield. Before him were thousands of dead Persian soldiers. His army had won, but the victory looked nothing like he had imagined. A few thousand Greeks had managed to stop a massive army for days. They had destroyed the finest warriors Persia had. They had damaged the legend of Xerxes' invincibility. The angry king ordered his men to find Leonidas's body. When the remains were discovered, he made a decision that was considered unusual even for that time. The Persians often respected brave enemies. They could honor warriors who fought courageously against them. But Xerxes' anger was stronger than tradition. Leonidas was beheaded, and his head was placed on a stake. Xerxes wanted everyone to understand one thing: those who resisted Persia would be destroyed. But the result was the opposite. Leonidas became a symbol of resistance, and Xerxes' name became connected not only with power, but also with failure. After Thermopylae, the road into Greece was open. The Persian army continued its advance. Xerxes decided to gather even more forces. He called soldiers from all corners of his enormous empire. More ships appeared. More supplies were prepared. Persia continued moving toward its final goal, the complete destruction of Greek resistance. Many Greek cities no longer saw a reason to continue fighting. They chose submission. But Athens remained one of Xerxes' main targets. The city understood that it could not stop Persia alone. When it became clear that Athens could not be defended, the people made a difficult decision. They abandoned their city. Women, children, and the elderly were sent to nearby islands. Athens became empty. But a small group refused to leave. They climbed onto the Acropolis. For them, this was the last place they could defend, the final symbol of their city. The Persians began the siege. Eventually, they found a way into the fortress. The last defenders were destroyed. The Acropolis fell. The temples were looted. The statues were damaged. For the Greeks, this became one of the darkest moments of the entire war. It seemed that Persia had won. Athens was destroyed. Sparta had lost its king. Xerxes' army continued moving forward. But at this exact moment, a man appeared who was about to change the course of the war. His name was Themistocles. Themistocles understood one thing. The Greeks could not defeat Persia on land. Even after the heroic defense of Thermopylae, the difference in strength remained enormous. The Persian army was too large, and that meant the only chance to stop Xerxes was not on the battlefield. It was at sea. Themistocles believed that the fate of the war would be decided by the fleet. If the Persian ships were destroyed, Xerxes' enormous army would be cut off from supplies, and then even the greatest empire in the world would become vulnerable. But there was one problem. The Persian fleet was much larger than the Greek one. Fighting it seemed impossible. However, Themistocles saw something others did not. He understood that sometimes weakness could become an advantage, especially when the enemy was too confident in its victory. He suggested luring the Persian fleet into the narrow straits near the island of Salamis. Many Greek commanders disagreed. They believed they should retreat and save what remained of their forces. Some even wanted to abandon Athens completely. But Themistocles understood. If they retreated now, Persia would destroy Greece piece by piece. They needed to take a risk, and he decided to deceive Xerxes. Themistocles sent a man with a false message. The Persians were told that the Greeks were planning to escape, that their fleet was preparing to leave Salamis. Xerxes believed it. To him, this looked like the perfect moment. After months of war, the enemy finally appeared to be on the edge of defeat. The Persian king decided to destroy the Greek fleet in one decisive attack. And that was exactly what Themistocles was waiting for. The enormous Persian fleet entered the strait. Hundreds of ships began moving forward. Xerxes watched everything from the shore. He was certain of his victory. But there was one problem. What seemed like Persia's greatest advantage became its weakness. In open waters, a massive fleet created power. But inside the narrow strait, everything changed. The Persian ships blocked each other. They collided. They could not move freely or turn effectively. The Greek ships, although fewer in number, now had the space they needed to maneuver. The battle began. The Athenian ships attacked first. They crashed into Persian vessels with their rams. Wooden hulls broke apart. Ships sank. The sea turned into chaos. Persian warriors, who were used to victories on land, now found themselves trapped. And the most devastating thing for Xerxes was not even the number of ships lost. It was what he witnessed with his own eyes. His enormous army had finally suffered a real defeat. The fleet that was supposed to open the way to the complete conquest of Greece was being destroyed. Salamis became the turning point of the war. Xerxes understood. If he remained, the situation could become even worse. He left part of his army in Greece and returned to Persia. But this was no longer the triumphant return of a conqueror. It was a retreat. However, the war was not over yet. Xerxes left his best commander in Greece, Mardonius. Under his command remained a powerful Persian army. Thousands of soldiers, elite units, the best Persian cavalry. Mardonius was supposed to complete what Xerxes had failed to do, to completely break Greek resistance. But now the situation had changed. After Salamis, the Greeks finally believed that victory was possible. They no longer saw Persia as an unstoppable force. They had seen that even the most powerful empire could make mistakes. In the spring of 479 BC, Mardonius attempted to divide the Greek alliance. He offered Athens peace. The Persians promised to return their lands, restore their city, provide wealth, maintain independence. But there was one condition. Athens had to recognize Xerxes' authority. The Athenians refused. They understood if they accepted the offer, the war would end. But the price would be too high. They would lose not only their freedom, they would lose the very idea they were fighting for. So Mardonius entered Athens again. The city, which had only begun recovering after the first destruction, was destroyed once more. For its people, it was another devastating blow. But now the Greeks had a new plan. They were preparing for the final battle. The main leader among the Spartans became Pausanias. He was a relative of Leonidas, and now it was his responsibility to command the Greek army. In the spring, the Allies gathered forces they had never assembled before. Around 100,000 Greek warriors united against Persia. Sparta sent its best fighters. Hoplites from different city-states joined them. Athens, Corinth, Megara, and many others finally fought together. Among these warriors was a man with a painful past. His name was Aristodemus. A year earlier, he was supposed to die alongside Leonidas at Thermopylae, but he survived. According to one version, he was sent away because of illness. According to another, he was too weak to continue fighting. For the Spartans, it did not matter. He returned. And that meant he had broken the greatest law of Sparta. His people considered him a coward. No one spoke to him. He lost the respect of society. But now he had a chance to change everything. On the battlefield. The armies met near the city of Plataea. Mardonius chose this location carefully. The open plain was perfect for the Persian cavalry. Thousands of horsemen could move freely, attack, and retreat. But the Greeks refused to fight on Persia's terms. They positioned themselves near the mountains. There, the cavalry lost its greatest advantage. For several days, the two armies stood facing each other. Each side waited for the first move. Mardonius tried to force the Greeks onto the open ground, but Pausanias was patient. He understood. One mistake could destroy the entire army. Then the Persians decided to attack in another way. They began striking the Greek supply lines. They intercepted food shipments. They blocked access to water. The Greek position became worse. The army began suffering from hunger and thirst. Pausanias realized they could not remain there any longer. During the night, the Greeks had to retreat to better positions. But at that exact moment, everything began to go wrong. Some Allied forces moved too quickly, others stayed behind, and one Spartan commander refused to follow the order. He believed Spartans should never retreat. As a result, the Greek army became divided, and in the morning, Mardonius saw what he had been waiting for. It looked like the Greeks were running away. He gave the order to attack, but he did not know yet. This mistake would become the last one of his life. Mardonius believed that the Greeks were retreating. He saw the divided army and decided that the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. The Persian forces began moving forward, but they made a mistake. They underestimated their enemy. Pausanias still had under his command the strongest warriors of Greece, and when the Persians came closer, they faced what had already happened once before at Thermopylae, the Greek phalanx. The Persian archers attacked first. They raised their shields and began firing thousands of arrows. The sky once again filled with projectiles. The Spartans protected themselves behind their large bronze shields. They stood under the storm of arrows and waited for the right moment to strike. Every second was important. Arrows fell around them. Some warriors died, but the formation remained unbroken. Pausanias understood. If they charged too early, the army could be destroyed. According to Spartan tradition, sacrifices were made before battle, but the signs were unfavorable. That meant they could not attack. It seemed almost impossible. Thousands of Persian arrows were flying toward the Spartans, yet they simply stood there, waiting, enduring. But then the situation changed. The signs became favorable. Pausanias gave the order. Forward. 5,000 Spartan warriors moved toward the Persian army. Bronze shields locked together, spears raised, red cloaks moving in a single rhythm. According to tradition, flutes played behind them. The music helped them maintain formation. Every soldier moved together with the others. They were not separate fighters. They were one machine. The Persians continued firing, but it was too late. The Greeks had already come close enough, and the attack began. The Spartan phalanx crashed into the Persian line. The woven shields of Persia could not withstand the impact. The lighter protection of the Persian warriors collided with the heavy armor of the Greek hoplites. And once again, the same thing happened as at Thermopylae. The Persian soldiers were brave. They fought until the end. But their weapons and tactics were not suited for this kind of battle. Greek spears were longer, their shields were stronger, and their formation remained united. One after another, Persian warriors fell, and slowly it became clear Mardonius was losing. During this battle, one man was waiting for his moment, Aristodemus, the Spartan who had returned from Thermopylae, the man who had been called a coward. For him, this battle was not only a war, it was a chance to restore his name. He no longer wanted to prove something to others. He wanted to prove to himself that he was still worthy of being called a Spartan. In the middle of the fighting, Aristodemus charged forward. He fought with the fury of a man who had lost everything. Ancient sources describe him as showing incredible courage, but along with victory came his death. He died where he wanted to die, on the battlefield, with a weapon in his hands. But the main figure of the battle remained Mardonius. The Persian commander was personally among his soldiers. He understood, if the army lost him, everything would collapse. He fought at the front, on a white horse, surrounded by his best warriors. But fate had already been decided. A Spartan soldier named Arimnestus saw him among the chaos. He lifted a stone and threw it. The strike hit Mardonius directly in the head. The Persian commander fell, and with him fell the last hope of the army. When the soldiers saw that their leader was dead, order began to disappear. A retreat turned into a complete escape. Thousands of warriors abandoned their weapons and tried to survive. The great Persian army began to collapse, but the battle was not finished yet. On another part of the battlefield, Greek forces faced the allies of Persia. Among them were the Thebans, the same Greeks who had chosen the side of the invaders during Xerxes' campaign. Now they had to fight against their own people. But the outcome of the war was already decided. When the main Persian forces were defeated, the Thebans also began retreating. The remaining Persian soldiers fled toward a fortified camp near the river Asopus. There, they tried to find safety. The camp was surrounded by wooden walls. Inside were thousands of warriors. It seemed that they could survive the attack. But the Greeks were not going to stop. The Spartans were the first to reach the fortifications. However, there was a problem. The Spartans were masters of open battles. They were used to meeting enemies on the field. But a siege was different. Even Sparta itself had no great city walls. The Spartans used to say, "Our walls are our shields." But now, shields alone were not enough. Persian archers fired from the fortifications. The Spartans could not quickly break inside. Then the Athenians arrived. They had more experience with sieges. They began destroying the defenses, climbing the walls, breaking through the barriers, and finally they found a weak point. A section of the wall collapsed. Through it, the Greek army entered. The final stage of the battle began. The Persian camp became a place of destruction. Thousands of warriors died. The army that once seemed impossible to defeat disappeared before their eyes. The Greeks remembered everything. Thermopylae, the death of Leonidas, the burning of Athens. Now the time had come for their answer. After the victory, the Greeks found the tent of Mardonius. Inside were riches that showed the enormous difference between two worlds. Gold, silver, jewels, luxury fabrics. According to legend, Pausanias ordered a Persian feast to be prepared, and beside it he placed a simple Spartan meal: black broth, bread, a small amount of meat. And then he said, "Look at the riches for which the Persian king came here. He had everything, but he wanted to take even this from us." These words became a symbol of the conflict between two different visions of the world. Persia came to conquer and expand its power. The Greeks fought for their cities and their freedom. But even after the victory, Aristodemus did not receive the glory he expected. Sparta did not call him a hero. For the Spartans, it was not enough to know how a person fought. It also mattered why they fought. They believed Aristodemus had not fought only for his state, he had fought for his own name. And because of that, his achievement was not viewed the same way as the sacrifice of those who died with Leonidas. But while Mardonius's army had been destroyed on land, the war was still continuing at sea. The final chapter of the conflict with Persia would be decided near the shores of Asia Minor, at a place that entered history as the Battle of Mycale. The Battle of Mycale became the final major confrontation of the Persian invasion, but for the Greeks, this was not simply another victory. It was the moment when they finally understood. Xerxes' empire could no longer destroy them. However, somewhere far away, near the shores of Asia Minor, the Persian fleet still remained. And while it existed, the threat against Greece was not completely gone. The final clash was about to happen near the coast of Mycale. After the defeat of Mardonius's army at Plataea, the Persians no longer wanted to continue their advance. They had lost their main land force, but their fleet was still dangerous. The Greek ships sailed toward the enemy. Their goal was not only to win another battle, they wanted to permanently destroy Persia's ability to launch another invasion. When the Greek fleet approached the coast of Mycale, the Persians made their decision. They did not choose to fight in open waters. Instead, they pulled their ships onto the shore and created a fortified camp. To them, this seemed like the safest option. On land, they could use their soldiers, but this decision became their mistake. The Greeks landed, and the attack began. The Battle of Mycale was unusual. It was a naval conflict that turned into a land battle. Greek warriors advanced against Persian defenses. Athenians, Spartans, and their allies once again faced the army of the empire. The Persians defended themselves desperately. They built walls from ships, shields, and wood. Archers took positions inside the camp. Every meter of ground had to be captured through fighting. But slowly, the advantage shifted to the Greeks. Once again, the strength of their heavy infantry became decisive. The hoplites were created for close combat, and when they broke into the Persian defenses, the enemy lines began to collapse. Soon, the Greek forces entered the camp. The Persian fleet was destroyed. The ships were burned. The army suffered another devastating defeat. Now, Xerxes had almost no chance of restoring control over Greece. This was the end of one of the most famous wars of the ancient world. But the consequences were much greater than simply one nation defeating another. Persia remained a powerful empire. It did not disappear. Its wealth and armies still made it one of the strongest powers of its time. But after these events, something important changed. The Greeks stopped being afraid. Before the war began, many believed resistance was impossible. Persia seemed too large, too wealthy, too powerful. But several Greek cities proved otherwise. They showed that even small states could challenge a massive empire. The position of Athens changed dramatically. The city that had been destroyed by Xerxes' army did not simply recover. It began to become the center of a new world. After the war, Athens created an alliance of Greek cities known as the Delian League. Originally, its purpose was to protect Greece from another Persian attack. But over time, Athens began using it as a tool of its own power. Cities that had once been allies were now required to pay money to Athens and follow its decisions. The city became richer. Trade expanded. The navy grew stronger, and Athens became a center of culture and ideas. This period became known as the Golden Age of Athens. Great thinkers appeared. Magnificent temples were built. Philosophy, art, and democracy developed. But along with this success came growing tension with Sparta. The victory over Persia had united the Greeks for a short time, but peace did not last forever. The allies who once stood together against Xerxes soon began seeing each other as enemies, and this rivalry would eventually lead to another great war, the Peloponnesian War. But the memory of the war against Persia remained forever. Thermopylae became a symbol of sacrifice. Salamis became an example of strategy and deception. Plataea became a symbol of unity. And Mycale placed the final mark on Persia's attempt to conquer Greece. The story of Leonidas and his warriors survived for centuries. But the most important lesson of this conflict was not only that 300 Spartans fought against a massive army. The true lesson was different. Victory is not determined only by the number of soldiers, not only by wealth, not only by the size of an empire. Sometimes the most important factor is what people are willing to fight for. Persia came to Greece seeking power and expansion. The Greeks defended their homes, their cities, and their way of life. And that was what allowed them to achieve what seemed impossible. To stop the greatest empire of their time. Thousands of years later, the names of these people are still remembered. Leonidas, Themistocles, Pausanias, Aristodemus. They lived in a world where wars decided the fate of nations, but their actions became part of a story that outlived them. Because sometimes a single moment can change everything. One battle, one mistake, one person who decides not to retreat. And that is why the Greco-Persian Wars remain one of the most fascinating stories of the ancient world. A story about how a small group of free cities managed to challenge an empire that seemed impossible to defeat. The victory over Persia changed Greece forever, but together with victory came new challenges. The Greeks no longer feared an outside enemy. Now they began fighting among themselves, and the greatest rivalry became the conflict between two of the most powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta. Two cities that had once fought together to save Greece slowly began moving in different directions. Sparta always remained a symbol of military strength. Its army was considered the greatest in Greece. The Spartans believed in discipline, order, and tradition. For them, the perfect state was a state of warriors, a place where every person knew their role, where duty to the homeland was more important than personal desires. Athens was completely different. Its power was built not only on soldiers, its greatest weapon was the fleet. Its wealth came from trade, and its influence grew through culture and politics. After the victory over Persia, Athens became the main naval power of Greece. It controlled an alliance of cities that had originally been created to protect against another Persian invasion. But over time, this alliance began transforming into an Athenian empire. Cities that were once allies now had to pay Athens and follow its decisions. For many, this became a warning sign, especially for Sparta. It saw how powerful Athens was becoming, and eventually, the fear of Athens became almost as great as the fear of Persia itself. A fragile peace remained between the two powers, but the tension continued growing. Each side believed that it was protecting the correct order of Greece. Sparta feared that Athenian democracy and influence would destroy the traditional world. Athens believed that its power was the result of victory and the contribution it had made during the war. Slowly, Greek cities began choosing sides. Some supported Athens. Others supported Sparta. Greece became divided, and only a few decades after the victory over Xerxes, a new war began, the Peloponnesian War. This war was completely different. When fighting Persia, the Greeks had united against an outside enemy. Now they were destroying each other. Athens had the strongest navy. Sparta had the strongest army on land. Each side had its own advantages. Athens could receive resources from the sea. Sparta could dominate on the battlefield. It seemed that neither side could achieve a quick victory. But then a tragedy struck Athens. A deadly disease spread through the city. It appeared during the war and began killing thousands of people. Among those who died was one of Athens' greatest leaders, Pericles. The city that once seemed to represent the peak of Greek civilization began to weaken. The war continued for many years. Commanders changed, alliances changed. Unexpected victories and defeats happened again and again. But slowly, the advantage moved towards Sparta. One of the main reasons was the involvement of Persia. The irony of history was that after the Greco-Persian Wars, Persia once again became involved in Greek conflicts, but this time it supported Sparta. Persian money helped Sparta build a stronger fleet. Athens lost its greatest advantage. In 404 BC, the war ended. Athens was defeated. Its walls were destroyed, its influence disappeared. Sparta became the strongest state in Greece, but not for long. Because victory brought it not peace, but new conflicts. Greece continued becoming weaker. The city-states kept fighting for power, and a new force took advantage of this situation: Macedonia. In northern Greece existed a kingdom that many Greeks had once considered less important, but everything changed when one man came to power. His name was Philip II. He created an army that became one of the most effective military forces of the ancient world. Philip transformed warfare. He increased the role of infantry. He created the famous Macedonian phalanx with extremely long spears called sarissas. He combined Spartan discipline with Greek military ideas. But most importantly, he understood the weakness of the Greek cities. They were too busy fighting each other. and because of this, they could not unite against a new threat. In 338 BC, the Battle of Chaeronea took place. The Macedonian army faced the combined forces of the Greek cities. Among them were Athens and Thebes. The future of Greece was decided on this battlefield, and Philip won. After this battle, the independence of most Greek city-states effectively ended. But Philip never had the chance to complete all of his plans. He was assassinated, and his place was taken by his son, a young ruler who was only around 20 years old. His name would become known throughout the world: Alexander. Alexander the Great inherited more than just a throne. He inherited his father's army and his dream to conquer Persia, the same empire that had once tried to destroy Greece. More than a century after Xerxes' invasion, everything had changed. Now it was the Greek army moving east, not defending, but attacking. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the same passage that Xerxes had once crossed with his enormous army. But now, history had turned in another direction. Once, Persia came to Greece. Now Greece was coming to Persia. And ahead of Alexander waited the greatest empire of the ancient world, and the man who would become his greatest enemy, King Darius III.